started to see bodies throughout Medellin.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana, vives el terror.
Mira bien, hijo de tu puta madre, soy Mencho, güey.
Before we can discuss the brutal ways people are punished for betraying drug lords, we must clarify what qualifies as betrayal. The cartel world is particularly sensitive when it comes to betrayal. Drug lords have fragile egos, inflated by money and power, but still vulnerable and desperate not to be offended. If their power is threatened in any way, even if someone looks at them the wrong way, they consider it within their rights to remove that threat. Sadly, drug lords won't just remove a threat, they will make an example out of it, so that other people think twice before offending them or going against them. Many things can happen when you betray a vicious drug lord, and all of them are unspeakable. Let's explore some of the worst stories from the world's most brutal drug lords. In 2016, El Chapo was arrested for a third and final time, but his story is far from over. In 2017, he was extradited to the United States to face myriad charges, from running a destructive criminal organization to personally torturing his victims. He received a life sentence at the highest security prison in the U.S., the ADX Supermax in Florence, Colorado. But before his sentence was a lengthy trial. This is when the truly vicious nature of this drug lord was revealed. Until then, some people assumed that as the Sinaloa cartel's kingpin, El Chapo didn't have to get his hands dirty. He could just order hits from his luxurious mansions and take care of the more abstract side of the business. But the thing is, El Chapo liked to get his hands dirty. During his trial, El Chapo's former bodyguard, Isaias Valdez-Rios, described how El Chapo whipped two men senselessly for over 3 hours. They were completely like rag dolls. Their bones were totally broken. They could not move, and Joaquin was still hitting them with the branch and his weapon too. El Chapo would also take pleasure in prolonging his victims' pain for as long as possible. Once, he received a narco from the Arellano Felix cartel as a present from his sicarios. This is what his former bodyguard remembers. He had burns made with an iron on his back. His shirt was stuck to his skin. He had burns made with a car lighter all over his body. His feet were burned. In this state, El Chapo kept the man in a large chicken coop for days, continuing to fire at him and keep him inches away from death. Not even his death was merciful. The poor man was buried alive. El Chapo also had a habit of leaving his enemies in little pieces, in ice chests, scattered across town. In 2010, this is how officers found rival cartel member Hugo Hernandez, and that wasn't all. Hernandez's face, sewn onto a football, was left in a plastic bag near City Hall. A note read, "Happy New Year, because this will be your last." With this message, El Chapo was also threatening authorities. Remember how we said that kingpins have fragile egos? El Chapo expected everyone to fall in line and do what he said. He bribed officers, judges, and even high-ranking politicians. So every time the Sinaloa cartel made a buck, they made some sense too. This way, he would be protected from justice, no matter what he did. But not everyone could be bribed, and El Chapo couldn't stand this. Of course, he was afraid of arrest, and even more afraid of extradition. When he was stopped in traffic in January 2016 by 4 officers, and they refused his bribe, he simply told them, "You're all going to die." Well, they didn't. Instead, he will be spending his entire life in solitary confinement, constantly reminded that what he did was wrong. Sadly, El Chapo's sons took after their father in the worst way imaginable. In 2023, one of his sons, Ovidio Guzman, was arrested and stood trial for a long list of crimes. Just like in El Chapo's case, some of the testimonies were stomach-turning. Once information was obtained by these captives, typically through torture, these individuals were killed, either by or at the direction of the Chapitos themselves, and the bodies disposed of throughout the area. While many of these victims were shot, others were fed, dead or alive, to tigers. These were things Ovidio and his brothers personally did to their victims. For approximately 2 hours, members of the Ninis tortured victim 5 by inserting a corkscrew into victim 5's muscles, ripping it out of his muscles, and placing hot chilies in his open wounds and nose, before being shot dead by Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, the indictment alleges. The victim and his fellow slain officer were then dumped near a motel off the highway near the ranch. El Chapo groomed his sons to perfection in his eyes, and they were just as sensitive to betrayal and eager to destroy whomever wronged them. As of 2023, Ovidio's 3 brothers are still at large, and it's very likely they're still exercising revenge on traitors in the same chilling ways. Thanks to El Chapo's sons, the Sinaloa cartel is even more powerful today than before El Chapo's arrest. DEA Chief Ann Milgram said about the Sinaloa cartel, "Death and destruction are central to their whole operation. The Sinaloa cartel is a network that fuels violence and death on both sides of the border. Authorities in Mexico and the US are working hard to arrest the kingpins and bring the cartel to an end. But with such brutal response from its drug lords, it's going to be a long, hard battle." Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho, is pure evil, plain and simple. The way he exacts revenge on people who have wronged him is beyond brutal. It's monstrous. He started as a poor avocado farmer's boy, but he was as young as 11 when he realized he could make big bucks by moving narcotics in the avocado crates. From there, he went from dealer to law enforcement officer to drug lord. That's right, El Mencho worked for just under a year as an officer of the law. But by that point, he'd been involved in the narcotics trade both in Mexico and the United States. In fact, he'd just been deported back to Mexico after getting arrested twice in a row, so it's safe to say he didn't join law enforcement after having a revelation. He just used his time there to learn military organization. When he formed his own cartel in 2009, this was apparent.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
As soon as El Mencho's cartel, the CJNG, took shape, violence in Mexico skyrocketed. El Mencho had a giant paramilitary army made of young, brutal, psychotic killers. He recruited the worst of the worst, including men who skinned and boiled people alive, and he weaponized them with tanks, drones, and heavy artillery. El Mencho climbed his way to kingpin level and maintained his position by exercising revenge on anyone who stood in his way. Rival cartel members, officers, politicians, civilians, and enemies' families all suffered horrific fates at his hands.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana, vives el terror.
In El Mencho's eyes, almost anything qualifies as betrayal. Once, he had a teenager unalived after he cussed at El Mencho in a reel. Juan Luis Lagunas Rosales, known online as El Pirata de Culiacán, was born in 2000, and by the time he was 17, he was Culiacan's greatest sensation. Only 17 years old, he had over 1 million followers on Facebook and more than 300,000 on Instagram. For many teens around the world, it seemed like he had the perfect life, but a closer look at his life reveals a pretty sad story. Juan's father abandoned his family before he was even born, and his mother felt so overwhelmed that she left him in the care of his grandmother. His grandmother, sadly, also felt overwhelmed when it came to disciplining him and offering him guidance. When Juan was 15 years old, he dropped out of school and ran away to Culiacán. He got a job as a car cleaner to make ends meet. But around this time, Juan discovered his love of alcohol and soon spiraled out of control. One day, someone filmed him as he downed an entire bottle of vodka. Juan passed out on camera, but this didn't bother him. In fact, he decided to make a thing out of it. His popularity online quickly snowballed, and his newfound fame earned him invitations to more and more parties. People wanted to see if he could outdo himself, and he wanted more videos of it, hoping to achieve even more stardom. He would chug down quantities of alcohol shocking for even the most seasoned adult drinkers. And to think, he was only 15 or 16 years old. Juan's videos quickly went viral. Teenagers were amused by his party animal attitude, and people around the world were oddly fascinated by how a baby-faced teen could drink so much. This was wrong on many levels, but you know how we tend to be fascinated by taboo or macabre content. Well, the Pirate of Culiacán was one such divisive sensation. He drew a mustache on his face and photographed himself with naked women or luxury cars. but everyone could see he was still, in many ways, a child. Sadly, people encouraged him to continue this behavior for their own amusement. The only cold shower was a 2017 arrest for underage drinking. After his release, he appeared in an interview and confessed he was hoping to curb his addiction. However, just a few months later, El Mencho would take his life. In late 2017, the pirate of Culiacan was once again drunk. He decided to post a video of himself making silly jokes. One of them said,
El Mencho a mí me...
This was not the first time Juan had filmed himself doing or saying silly things while inebriated. Who really takes these drunken reels seriously? Turns out, El Mencho did. His fragile ego and dictatorial personality did not allow for his name to be mocked in any context. Someone said about El Mencho, "This is a guy who will execute your whole family based on not much more than a rumor. He just has zero regard for human life." On December 17, 2017, Juan posted on social media where he would be that night, inviting his followers to meet him at one of his favorite bars in Jalisco. At 11 p.m., 4 armed men entered the bar, aimed at his head, and fired at least 15 times. His face was left unidentifiable. The officers identified the body by his tattoos. A bartender also lost his life that night after one of the bullets meant for Juan hit him. He died a few hours later in the hospital. For El Mencho, this did not matter. He had to spread the message, do not betray the CJNG. And if this was the message after one drunken reel, imagine his punishment for betrayal by his former friend, El Cholo. El Cholo met El Mencho while they both worked for the Millennial Cartel in the 2000s. Their boss was Kingpin Armando Valencia Cornelio, aka El Maradona. When El Maradona was arrested, El Mencho worked hard to keep the cartel together. El Cholo was his right-hand man. Within a year, El Mencho reorganized the Millennial Cartel into the CJNG, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. This was going to be his brutal empire. El Mencho quickly became a dictatorial figure who didn't stand to hear no or even accept diverging ideas from a fellow CJNG member. Eventually, this led to a rivalry with El Cholo. You see, El Cholo was used to being El Mencho's most trusted man. He gave him advice and helped him whenever he needed an extra hand. Now, El Cholo had new ideas for CJNG, but El Mencho couldn't stand this. He saw El Cholo as arrogant and not falling in line, and El Cholo began resenting El Mencho for this. Why should he be a simple foot soldier after they were equals? El Cholo began carrying out assassinations without El Mencho's green light, but someone ratted him out, Marcos Hernandez, the cartel's financial operator. Snitching is a pretty recurrent behavior in cartels. By snitching on someone, a narco can climb up the ranks and one day become a kingpin. It's one of the many ways cartels are a dog-eat-dog world. After hearing about the incident, El Cholo could have gone to El Mencho and asked for forgiveness, but he was even more furious. He killed Marcos Hernandez in broad daylight while he was in his car. El Mencho declared war on El Cholo. This is when El Cholo split from the CJNG and formed his smaller cartel, Nueva Plaza. He also took CJNG's head of logistics with him, Eric Valencia Salazar, aka El Ocho Cinco. This was already the ultimate betrayal, but it went on. El Cholo knew El Mencho's tactics by heart, so he was able to dodge attacks and even win many battles. When El Mencho ordered a hit on El Cholo predicted the ambush and took out the commander of the hit squad. Then, in 2017, El Cholo formed an alliance with the Sinaloa cartel, Mexico's most powerful cartel. At this point, the Nueva Plaza cartel was a real threat to the notorious CJNG. It was because of this war that 2017 was a record year for Mexico's homicide rate. Over 31,000 people. El Mencho took the lives of several university students, confusing them for El Cholo's soldiers. He set fire to buses, blocked roads, and took thousands of lives based on a hunch. All hell broke loose, and El Cholo was at the center of it. But in March 2021, it would all come to a brutal end for El Cholo after he was located and taken to a CJNG safe house. El Cholo was forced to confess his betrayal, praise the CJNG, and downgrade his own cartel on camera. In his confession, he didn't just implicate the Nueva Plaza and the Sinaloa cartel. "I'm here because I'm an enemy of CJNG. I met with Omar Garcia Harfuch in the federal district so that he could give me his back. This is due to both of us being after the CJNG, and he did give me his full support. Indeed, El Cholo said he had collaborated with Omar Garcia Harfuch, the Mexico City police chief at the time. This was a huge betrayal in the eyes of the CJNG. Omar Harfuch later denied El Cholo's claim that they ever collaborated. Regarding a video in which a criminal kidnapped by other criminals refers to comments about me, I reiterate that we will not be distracted by false messages from criminals. My commitment to society is firm, to fight crime to the last consequences. At the end of his taped confession, El Cholo urged his soldiers to focus on their families and shift allegiances to save their lives. He knew what was about to happen. El Mencho's men kept El Cholo alive for days, inches away from death, resuscitating him every time he would pass out. The CJNG filmed every second of the unspeakable punishment. We cannot mention everything they did to El Cholo over the 2 or 3 days. Let's just say, when they were done with him, he was not whole anymore. On March 18th, authorities found his body on a bench in Jardín Hidalgo, in a Jalisco tourist center. It was wrapped in plastic, with 2 signs stuck to it using knives. One read, "The traitor El Cholo." On the same day, CJNG released the awful video showing his last days. The autopsy found several organs missing, including his eyes and tongue. El Mencho was once again delivering his message. Everyone should fear them. Sadly, no one did anything about El Cholo's horrifying death, not even the authorities, nor the Sinaloa cartel. If you're wondering whether law enforcement is afraid of El Mencho, the short answer is yes.
Mira bien, hijo de tu puta madre. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tu puta gente a la verga. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus putas partidas, si no te voy a partir tu madre y toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey.
This is how El Mencho treats officers. Unlike other kingpins who use bribing to manipulate and control authorities, El Mencho uses sheer intimidation. And since everyone knows what happens if you disagree with him, even officials seem to let him do his bidding. We're going back in time for this one. Pablo Escobar is still the richest kingpin in history, and for the sake of our story, he's something else. An example of how fear is the main motivating force for a kingpin. Indeed, drug lords like to paint themselves as ruthless, fearless, powerful men, but it's their fear of arrest and their fear of losing their power that makes them commit the worst atrocities. If this wasn't evident in the cases of El Chapo and El Mencho, it will be in the case of Escobar. Much like his Mexican counterparts, Pablo Escobar was born into a very poor family that barely made ends meet, so the fear of poverty and the desire to overcome his condition were Pablo's first incentives. At age 17, he dropped out of school and started finding illegal and increasingly violent ways of making quick money.
He initially started robbing gravestones from cemeteries and shaving the names off and then reselling them.
That progressed to robbery, car theft, and protection against car theft for a price. Loan sharking, kidnapping for ransom, and taking lives became Escobar's career before he even turned 30. In 1971, Pablo Escobar and his cousin kidnapped a rich businessman, Diego Echevarria, and demanded a $50,000 ransom. After receiving it, they offed Echevarria and threw him in a ditch. That same year, Pablo decided to enter the white powder trade. He and a few associates would bring in the raw product from Peru and Bolivia, convert it into a consumable, then export it through the Caribbean into the United States. After he got a taste for power and money, Escobar became unstoppable. He would climb the ranks of the local mafia and wipe out leader after leader, taking their place until he reached the very top. Then he formed his own cartel, the notorious Medellin cartel. By the late 1970s, he had his own fleet of airplanes, which he used for back-and-forth trips between Colombia, Ecuador, and the United States.
And as a result of that, it became the economic law of supply and demand. And the Colombian criminals are probably some of the more astute in the world.
Escobar was almost solely responsible for the white powder epidemic in the United States. But of course, a name so big and destructive won't go unpunished for long. In 1976, he was arrested by the DEA and 39 pounds of illegal substances were found in the tire of his truck. This is when Escobar discovered the power of the bribe and blackmail. Plata o plomo, he said. In other words, accept my bribe or lose your life. After his arrest, Escobar blackmailed the judge and found another one who accepted his bribe. He used this method on any official who threatened to arrest him or end his operation. By 1980, he was a billionaire. He practically owned law enforcement in most South American countries, and he owned several estates, helicopters, exotic animals, and every luxury you can imagine.
The ranch had 9 man-made lakes, water slides, life-size dinosaurs made out of fiberglass. We estimate that he easily spent, maybe about $10 million in constructing that ranch.
Meanwhile, Pablo was getting more and more paranoid about getting arrested and extradited to the United States. You see, he knew he could probably bribe or blackmail his way out of Colombian jails, but if he earned himself a sentence in a U.S. prison, he would probably stay there for life. So he did all he could to ensure people wouldn't rat him out. He painted himself as a Robin Hood figure, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. He built restaurants, discos, football pitches, and even housing for the poor in Medellin. This is why thousands of people loved him, turning a blind eye to the crimes he committed. But don't be mistaken, Escobar was not a philanthropist.
Pablo Escobar exploited poverty.
But he was doing that not for altruistic, but for very selfish reasons, to make sure that the people weren't selling him out, that they looked upon him as the Robin Hood, and he had places to go and hide then if necessary.
What his fans didn't know or didn't want to believe is that he didn't just take money from the rich, he took lives for no more than a rumor, devastated entire families just for one enemy, and spread pain and destruction everywhere the Medellin cartel went. In 1983, Pablo Escobar entered politics and surrounded himself with a personal army at all times. He was trying to make himself invincible and impossible to capture. But his decision to become a politician only put his crimes under the spotlight. Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla informed everyone that there were serious criminal investigations of Escobar happening in the U.S. at the moment. Believing he still had the upper hand, he taunted Lara Bonilla to be more clear, lest he sued him. So Lara Bonilla released everything he knew about Escobar in the local newspapers. To Escobar, this was the ultimate betrayal. Lara Bonilla had to go. What he didn't realize, though, is that his fear and dictatorial ego would bring about his downfall. Escobar was kicked out of his political party, and the United States renounced his visa. The Colombian government began seizing his exotic animals, too. Lara Bonilla was working with the U.S., trying to extradite Escobar and have him tried for selling illegal substances. So in 1984, Escobar had Lara Bonilla assassinated in his personal car. He had crossed a big line with the Colombian government. This wasn't a sicario or a civilian. The government thus started working with the DEA to arrest him. Pablo Escobar tried to flee to Panama, but he wasn't welcome there either. Returning home, he asked the Colombian government to protect him in return for his help in ending the illegal substance trade. No one believed him, though, so they rejected his offer. He then fled to Nicaragua, but as he heard the news of his 73-year-old father being kidnapped, he went into another fit of rage, claiming he'd been betrayed. He then ordered a murder spree throughout Medellin. He would take life after life until his father would be released. Shockingly, it worked. In 1985, Escobar also had over 30 judges slain. All of them were supporting his extradition to the U.S. In November of that year, a guerrilla group called M19 held the entire Supreme Court hostage. Escobar had paid them $1 million to do this. He wanted the court to renounce the extradition treaty. But what happened was a massacre. 11 justices and 40 rebels died. By 1988, Medellin was in a continuous state of martial law, and homicides were being reported every single day.
I started to see bodies throughout Medellin, and I would leave my house early in the morning and I would see cadavers on the side of the road.
Officers simply didn't have time to clear the bodies before new ones appeared. It's hard to imagine living in Medellin during this time. In August 1989, presidential candidate Luis Galan made it clear that if he was elected, Escobar would be on the first plane to the United States. During his campaign, Escobar's men climbed onto the stage and offed Galan in front of everyone. Pablo Escobar didn't care about the consequences anymore. He was desperate to avoid extradition, even if that meant making more enemies. That same year, he ordered the bombing of a plane, leaving 110 casualties. He was trying to assassinate Cesar Gaviria, another presidential candidate, with extradition plans for him. However, Gaviria had canceled his flight at the last minute. In 1989, a large DEA operation led by Officer Joe Toft ended with 60 tons of white powder getting seized. Escobar shouted betrayal again. He put a $700 bounty on every law enforcement officer. Within 2 years, 457 officers lost their lives. Here's the thing. Pablo Escobar was no less paranoid and vengeful in his personal life. When he found out that one of his house servants had stolen some silverware, he personally drowned him in his pool in front of several guests. It gets even worse. Once he was with his mistress, journalist Virginia Vallejo, when he confessed something so shocking that even Virginia felt traumatized. It turns out Pablo once found out that his ex moved on and got pregnant by another man. Their relationship had already come to an end. She had not cheated on him, but he still felt betrayed. So he had his ex kidnapped and given a forced abortion. Words cannot express how traumatizing that must have been for the poor woman. Reportedly, she would feel physically ill whenever she heard his name after the incident. This doesn't just show how cruel Pablo Escobar was, it shows how insecure and paranoid he was, and a hypocrite too. He had moved on past that relationship, why wouldn't she? Also, he was married and had several mistresses. All the while, he wanted the women he loved, even those from his past, to stay loyal to him. Pablo didn't trust anyone around him either. He would repeatedly threaten his mistresses with death if they ratted him out, and he would have his own children blindfolded whenever they moved houses. This wasn't to protect his children. It was so that, if they got captured and interrogated, they wouldn't know where their father was. He never trusted his business associates or employees either. Even when he delegated some of the tasks, he kept a close eye on his people and remained suspicious of them. He would change bodyguards daily, and every time he needed to bury another barrel full of cash, he would ask someone else. After they buried it in an unknown location, Escobar would have them offed. That way, no one knew where the money was. Working for Escobar, you simply didn't know if you were going to survive the day. Was the promise of cash that appealing? In 1991, ever more fearful of extradition, Escobar made a deal with the Colombian government. He would turn himself in and spend time at a Colombian prison in exchange for the government's promise not to extradite him to the US. But there was a catch. Escobar would get to build his own prison, and La Catedral prison was more theme park than a prison. He had bars, restaurants, pool tables, jacuzzis, a football pitch, and a life-size dollhouse for his daughter to play in when his family would visit. When his family wouldn't visit, Escobar would throw constant parties with escorts, dealers, and his favorite soccer players. It all seemed like an elaborate joke on the Colombian government. Inside the prison, Escobar continued to be paranoid and exert extreme punishment for what he saw as betrayal. One time, he found out an electrician was pocketing a little extra money each month from Escobar's dealers. So he had his men drop him from a helicopter, just high enough to break his bones but not end his life. Then, Escobar's men drove their motorcycles over the poor man. Another time, he personally offed 4 of his lieutenants over a money dispute after subjecting them to unimaginable pain. And in 1992, he ordered the assassination of 2 cartel members over the prison phone. It was all dominoes from that point on. In July of that year, 2 officials came to escort Escobar to a regular federal prison. Instead, he took them hostage and escaped. He lived on the run for 16 months, increasingly paranoid and alone, as the government, the DEA, and vigilante groups were destroying his cartel. On January 30th, 1993, he attempted to assassinate the head of the Colombian security office with a car bomb. The target was not hit, but 21 civilians lost their lives, and dozens others were left severely injured.
There were half bodies of children and people all over the street that were waiting for the school bus.
Escobar fired at the officers until he lost his life. He was not going to be extradited. On paper, it might look cool to be one of the richest men in history and one of the most feared criminals in the world. But Pablo Escobar lived a life filled with desperation and paranoia. Simple karma for a cruel man with an insatiable lust for power. It goes the same way for El Chapo, El Mencho, and other vicious drug lords with no regard for human life. One day or another, they get a taste of their own bitter medicine. Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about today's video? What is the worst thing cartels do, and can it ever come to an end? Let me know what you think in a comment. And before you go, make sure you like and subscribe. See you next time.